Guys, welcome to the Dave Darren Show. We are going to have a fun night tonight. It's going to be an exciting night. And it's interesting. Here's how this started for you guys that maybe didn't tune in last night. Last night, Dave Darren was really an innocent guy. I was really innocent. I had a girl on from Pahrump, Nevada. She came on to talk about living in Pahrump. What the excitement level was there because they had a celebrity that lived in their backyard. Art Bell was out there. And she would pass by his home periodically. So I was going to ask if Art Bell, since he's no longer with us, maybe he's got aliens living in his house. Did you ever think about that? We can't see it. Did you ever notice when you see videos of his house, you never see any automobiles? I think that's because the alien spacecraft is there, and there's not enough room for the automobiles, so they got all the alien spacecrafts there, and they're doing all of their abductions there. That's what's going on in Art's house. I wanted to have a fun night of talking to the guest, and it was a great show. Then all of a sudden, Miller comes on. Now, Miller's coming on. I think he's drinking some buds, by the way, and Miller's actually watching the show right now, and so are a lot of people. Joyce, Angie's here. It's going to be a fun night because then, after Miller started talking, he was talking about Heather. Now, Heather Wade, I've never met Heather, so by the way, this is going to be a completely unjudgmental program. I never judge people, and I'm not very mental to be able to be judgmental anyway. But so there's going to be no judgment. There was none last night. I did find one thing unusual, and I'll bring this up before we get our guest on. We're going to talk to Heidi in a second. But one thing I found rather unusual is evidently Heather was people were doing like welfare checks on her. I didn't even know what a welfare check was. I thought it was when you're on welfare and you get your check, how much money that is. That's what I thought a welfare check was. I had no. The first time I heard it, I thought, well, she's doing a radio show. How could she's collecting welfare on top of it? What's going on with that? But then I found out what a welfare check was. And one thing I found unusual last night that was said is that someone had called in a welfare check. And supposedly, now I got different points on this as well. I got that she was in the studio and she was not at home. I heard someone say that she was at home. Someone did a welfare check, and then the sheriffs went down there, broke down the door. She's in the bathtub taking a bath. And I thought the only time that police or sheriffs could break in her house is if they had a warrant, if there was like pedophiles going on there, if there was something really illegal going on. Then like you see on all the TV programs, all the cop shows where they bust down the door, go in there and just take everyone out because they need to be taken out because they're doing something horrible. I thought beyond that, I thought welfare check, if they're not there to kill someone else or commit a homicide, like my wife will probably want to do to me eventually, but it's unless that's taken place, can they really break into your house and do a welfare check on you and make sure that you're not taking yourself out in a suicide? I didn't know that they could actually do that. I don't know. So we're going to have a discussion tonight. We're going to talk to Heidi. I'm going to introduce Heidi right now. Heidi, how are you?
Hi there. I'm good, thank you. Seeing it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Very good. Thank you for having me on the show.
Wow, 3 o'clock in the morning. You have a lot of stamina. You have as much stamina as I do, so that's very cool. First of all, let me introduce you as somebody that, well, let me let you introduce yourself. How do you know about Heather? Are you a fan? Were you a friend? Were you an acquaintance that you would talk to her via email privately? What was your association, familiarity with Heather?
So I suppose if we go right back, I'm a very big Art Bell fan. Have been since about 96, just when the internet started and it was possible for me to be able to listen to Art Bell over here in the UK because he doesn't play over here, obviously, or didn't. And I followed his career and enjoyed listening to him, was very upset when he retired a few times and came back, and got a Sirius XM membership when I shouldn't have been able to, so I could listen to him for 6 weeks on Sirius, and then he retired again, and then we waited, and in that time I just wanted to talk to more Art Bell fans, so I found what was then Coast Gab on the internet, which is a forum, which then became Bell Gab, and I joined in there when there was all the lead up to Midnight in the Desert and the Dark Matter digital radio network that Keith started while we were waiting for the non-compete for Art to run out. So then I followed him when he went on to Midnight in the Desert, and because I was on Belgab, I was very much a lurker on Belgab at that point. Um, there was a user on there called Redacted who was doing a huge blitz for art coming back. Redacted was Heather. As I said, I didn't post. I just went in there and read it because it was a bit crazy and I just kept up with it and it was funny. So I sort of followed Heather from her time as Redacted on Belgab. Then she went on to become, well, actually what happened first is just before Art came back for Midnight in the Desert, Heather and another member of the forum went and interviewed Art. Obviously got on very well because then Heather got a job as the producer for Art's show. So I've sort of been following from there and I'd followed the whole evolution of Heather and watched what has happened since then. So since probably about 2015, I've only ever spoken to her once on the phone during one of her shows. Didn't go very well, which I can explain. But generally, I've just been watching and looking at all the events most carefully since Art died, because that's when the doo-doo hit the fan, really.
Okay. Why didn't it go well? What took place during that phone call?
So...
Or am I jumping ahead and you'd rather lead on to that? Did I jump too quick ahead?
Yeah, you kind of jumped ahead. So
okay, so hold me back. Don't let me jump ahead because I want to get the chronological that you've got.
It gets quite interesting because I realise that you don't know much about the history of Heather in relation to Art. So it's probably really useful for you to hear about the rest of the evolution. So Midnight in the Desert started with Art. Heather was the producer. That was going all very swimmingly for a while. I can't remember exactly the date that he started back. Heather was the producer. It was all going well for probably about 4 or 5 months, and then there was an issue of a stalker and shots fired near the Bell property. Okay,
and those were fired on Art himself, not on Heather. They were fired on
No, they were fired on Art because Heather at that point was living in California somewhere. Wasn't anywhere near. Art was very worried about this issue and took the decision after the things escalated somewhat to retire. Heather took over.
Okay, now can I interrupt you just for a second here, if you don't mind?
Yes, yeah, please do.
Now, were those shots that were fired on Art, because I've heard some stuff here, because I listen, I really do listen, and I heard that some people said that those shots were not real or fictitious or just were they actually legitimately? Was it proof of that? I don't know.
There is some contention about this.
Some contention. Okay.
Karen Jackson. When I spoke to Karen Jackson, now Karen Jackson is a very long time friend of Art's, about 25 years, and now owns KNYE, which is the radio station that he started in Pahrump, and they were very, very close friends. She maintains that it did happen. There is conjecture over the severity of this stalking issue. You have to understand that Art's property is right next to BLM land, which is Bureau of Land Management, so it's basically open countryside. So I can imagine that if somebody's going around there letting off fireworks, which are legal in Nevada, that could have been misconstrued. However, Art was very adamant. Karen was very adamant, and also Heather was very adamant that this was going on. I don't know. It's one of the pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, now I would actually believe that there could be a stalker because I've had a stalker. So since I've had one, I could believe that other radio personalities have had them. So I'm not going to say that I witnessed it or have read facts or seen reports to justify that actually took place, but it could have happened. So let's say it could have very well happened, okay? Let's leave it at that, and then I'll let you continue on.
Okay, so there had been plans for Art to have someone to take over the show. I know that Howard Hughes in the UK was one of the possible contenders. He does a really good paranormal show, if anybody's interested. He still does it. and there was a couple of other people, but nobody took it on. Heather was the final choice, the last port in the storm.
Do you know if she was the preferred choice? Like, did Art actually have her as the number one choice, or other choices? Okay, so she wasn't the number one choice. Okay.
No, and I can imagine people are going, "Oh my God, no! Heather was his first, his first choice." It's been confirmed by Keith and Karen that she was not the first choice. Either way, she was plopped into the chair and she took over the show.
Now, did she kind of mentor in? Like, was she part of Art's? Like, I don't know. And unfortunately, I don't know. And unfortunately, someone said, Dave, if you don't know this stuff, how can you actually have a show about it? And the reason I want to is because I want to learn about it. So,
yeah.
So was she on as like a co-host for any period of time, like mentor, sitting in the chair, Art's talking to guests, she's contributing? Was it a smoother transition, or just she was just thrown right into it? Which took place?
The first show, there was a test show that Art did that Heather was sort of co-host with, and the general consensus of the audience was that they didn't enjoy that. And I remember hearing it and thinking, she sounds very nervous and she's not really adding to it, and we actually just want Art, which is fair enough.
Fair enough.
When she did her first show, she had some wannabe John Titor, the guy that's supposed to be the time traveller, on, and he was a very difficult guest. He would have been a very, very difficult guest for anybody, and it was going very badly, and I think halfway through, Art took over and started to ask some questions. But after that, she was in the chair on her own. I think he was doing some pep talks. When I spoke to her ex-producer, a chap called Tony Barnett, he told me during an interview that I did with him that Art did roughly around 3 hours of training with her, and then there was the odd phone call just to give her a pep talk.
When she came back, was she pepped up? Did that pep talk help, or was she? Because
I think at the start she was very much on a learning curve. She was
of course,
in a completely it's a scary thing to do, Actually, I do want to sort of correct you, because on your live chat this afternoon, you sort of suggested that she was going out to around 500 stations. It wasn't the case at all.
Oh, okay. How many was it? Do you have any idea? Because I know, wasn't Art on was about 500 channels, so I just assumed that Art's 500 channels was delivered to Heather, but not true, right?
No, he had around 500 affiliates when he was on Coast to Coast.
Okay.
So when he was on Midnight in the Desert at first, there was a lot of radio stations that were signing up. I can't exactly remember the number, but I would say probably edging towards 100. Okay. Now, when Heather took over, that number started to drop, and it dropped and dropped and dropped.
Right, but intimidating enough to even be on that less than 500. It's still intimidating, right? It's still intimidating, not easy.
And, you're sitting in Art Bell's chair, there must be a lot of pressure. And at first, I was a subscriber because I'd subscribed to listen to Art, so I still have my subscription, and I kept it going for a few months. And she was really trying and trying and trying. And then as the affiliates started to drop off, the situation carried on because subscribers were dropping. In November 2017, she was still doing the show, and she did mention on air that she didn't know how long the show would be able to carry on because the numbers of subscribers was dropping. Okay. So I think her fans got the word out, and I don't exactly know what happened. I think we're at a status quo. Of course, that was 5 months before Art passed.
Okay, so not obviously this is typical of radio, where it's very competitive. You have to have stations that are growing or listenership is growing, And then one of the things that she might not have or should have not said is that she had no idea how much longer the show was going to last. Maybe that may. I would assume that the radio station probably didn't want that to be out there, right?
Well, you have to understand that I don't know how Keith felt about it, but at that point the station it was a digital station, so it was working on a subscription model. It was going out to a few affiliates, but the revenue model was subscription.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So if we then fast forward, because we were at the status quo then, so we then fast forward to Art's passing. Do you know about the issues or what happened around the time that Art died with Heather?
No, the only thing I remember hearing based upon listening to Art is he had some back troubles, he was on medication. Beyond that, I don't know anything. So
okay,
tell me
but
what's going on.
So Art passed, and straight away there was one particular issue which, in my opinion, was in poor form for Heather. Is George Knapp tweeted out a remembrance of Art, saying, my friend has passed, or whatever it was he said, a great man of radio, we've lost someone. And Heather replied calling him a vulture, which I thought was a little bit harsh given the circumstances and how George known Art for probably 30 years. He was basically saying, my friend's dead and I'm really quite sad, and then Heather calls him a vulture.
Now, do you believe? Did you listen to that? Did you identify?
That was a tweet.
There was a tweet. Okay.
Yeah, it was a tweet he sent that he sent out that she replied to. She then went missing in action. Now her friend has died. Her friend that she's known for 3 years. Heather then doesn't want to come back and host the show because she's not ready. But then we get to about a week and a half, and Keith is suggesting that she perhaps needs to come back now.
Okay. After a week and a half, now, was there an explanation over that week and a half? Like Heather is not on the air because, of course, Art has passed away and it's a very sad time. So was there any identification, or was it just a transition into whatever took place, music, or was there an explanation of why Heather wasn't on the air for that week and a half?
Well, she was grieving. She was saying that she was unable to do the show because she missed Art. But you have to remember that, to put it in its plainest terms, she was an employee. And as callous as this may sound, in my country, if you have a family member that dies, you have a week off and then you go back to work.
Right.
I don't know how it is in the States for a friend, but she was refusing to go back to work. Keith then says, well, we need to do something because, we're offering a service and we're not giving a service, and people want to hear some kind of memorial to Art. That's important, and it's important to do that for Art.
Memorial on the air, correct?
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
Okay. Now, once again, let me repeat. During Heather's absence, and obviously Keith knew and the station knew about her grieving, did her fans and listeners know about her part from the air for the week and a half or whatever? Or was it completely an unknown? They knew, right?
She was communicating on Facebook and occasionally on Twitter, I think.
Was there any announcement on the air, though? Because some people aren't on Twitter. They're not on Facebook. Someone disappears and they know Art's passed away. They know that Heather was supposed to be there. She's not there.
Keith was playing repeats, and he also did a nice musical tribute because he didn't have something to put on the air. And he also actually played the autobiography, The Art of Talk, which Art himself had narrated, so he played that as well.
Okay.
Then he suggested that he might have to get a guest host because they obviously needed new content. They're providing a service, and it's not happening. So
Guest host meaning a temporary host, but not eliminating Heather. Just a guest host to fill in while Heather was grieving. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, at that stage.
Uh-huh.
And Heather went absolutely ballistic, said there would be no guest host. The only guest host she had was Art, and he was gone. And suggested to her fans that if Keith got a guest host in, they should ring up and cause mayhem.
Oh.
Yeah.
So they needed somebody there on the air to fill up the airtime because people are wanting a voice, they're wanting dialogue, they're wanting interviews, they're wanting what Art left behind. They were looking for that in Heather. Heather is grieving still, so a guest host might be appropriate until Heather gets her groove back.
Yeah.
That's the way it was, right?
Yeah.
She didn't like that though. She didn't like that at all.
She wasn't very happy. She suggested that fans push back on that, and if a guest host goes on the air, then they cause mayhem with the show.
Was she threatened that the guest host might be a total replacement? Was she fearful of that? Did she have a legitimate fear in that, do you think?
No, because I think Keith was very, very transparent during that time and said, look, if you need to take time, we'll just get someone else in, but we do need to have someone else in.
Yeah. At
one point, he was saying she can take 6 months if she needs, as long as I know that she's going to come back.
Okay.
So she made no contact. There was no contact. And Keith was keeping people as updated as possible at this point. And it got to about 2.5, 3 weeks. And he said, she's not getting in contact with me. I can't get in touch with her. She's not saying anything to me. And he terminated her contract.
Okay.
Because she wouldn't get in touch, and I'm sure there was some other things that she was saying some quite horrible things about Keith at that point. Mm-hmm. So Heather then decided that she was going to take Midnight in the Desert to somewhere else and have exactly the same show, but on a different network, and nothing to do with Keith. Unfortunately, she didn't own, and never owned, the actual entity of Midnight in the Desert. Mm-hmm. But that didn't stop her from saying she was going to go and use exactly the same name, exactly the same format, and everything. So it's basically a copyright infringement. Mm-hmm. So Keith then had to take action against that. She went to the L&M network, got set up, made a website. Was it Midnight in the Desert with Heather Wade, I think? Started the show. I think it was about May or early June on L&M. Exactly the same format. So Keith had to do a cease and desist to stop that from happening because it was his business entity.
Okay.
Which is fair enough. So then she had to change the name, and the name was changed to Kingdom of Nye. Was it with Heather Wade? It was the Kingdom of Nye.
So the cease and desist was not the cease and desist doing a show, but it was a cease and desist of using the same name, Midnight in the Desert, but she was free to carry on. Is that true?
Yeah.
She was free to carry on, just a different name change. And, by the way, was she an employee? You mentioned she was an employee, but was she a contracted employment with a non-compete, meaning she really shouldn't have been on the air at all, or she didn't have that?
I don't know if there was a non-compete.
Don't know about that. Okay.
No, I don't know about that.
Okay.
So by then we're talking about June, I think, when she was back on the air with the Kingdom of Nye. Uh-huh. I think that lasted until July, possibly. Then she was being rather meltdowny.
Okay.
Having some issues with her grief and things.
Okay, let me just step you back a bit.
Yeah.
Kingdom of Nye, was that a subscription-based thing? Was it syndicated on multiple stations, or what was that all about?
It was a subscription-based service. It was online, had an archive. I think there was possibly 3 affiliates at that point.
3 affiliates. Were they like terrestrial radio stations? I'm getting a little.
They were small terrestrial radio stations.
Small terrestrial. Okay.
Yeah.
But still terrestrial radio and significant with subscribers. Okay, so she was on there, and she had what you used the word meltdown, right?
Yeah, she was obviously still having grief issues, and she abruptly went off the air for 3 months.
Okay, so she's still having grief issues after Art died in April, which we just celebrated the remembrance of Art in April. And then she's 2 months later in June, she's back on with Kingdom of Nye. So that's 2 months later, and she's still grieving, which could make sense. I mean, she liked Art a lot, right? Good friend, mentor, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So she's still grieving after 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then goes off the air with no notice, really, for 3 months until she comes back in October.
Wow. Now, when she went off the air, was she doing quite well? Did she have a lot of support from her fans and all that? Was it going good for the 2 months before she vanished?
Not really, I don't think.
Not really.
But that's opinion.
But not a disaster, perhaps.
I think towards the end she was having issues. Yeah. She took over the show in 2015. She moved to Pahrump in 2016, but didn't tell her fans until 2017. And Art died in 2018.
Yeah, so she had a lot of experience then, right? A lot of experience.
She bought the Art's guest house 1 month before Art died.
Okay.
Off of him, yeah. So we're fast forwarding then to October 2018.
When she came back after being off for 3 months.
Yeah, she hadn't given any explanation to the network she was running on, which was L&M Network, and they hadn't heard from her for a long time. Then obviously got back in touch at some point. Came back.
What filled in the gap? What was in the gap of that 3 months? What did they have going on?
They had replays for a while, and then when they didn't hear back from her, they got a little bit upset.
Replays of her show, obviously, not Art's show. Replays of her show.
Yeah.
Okay. But she only did 2 months, so they had.
It didn't have a big back catalogue, no.
Right. Okay. Plus, it's supposed to be a live show, right? They want to have callers, and people can't call in because it's not a live show. They're hearing callers that called in.
Yeah.
2 months ago.
We can get to the stuff about callers later.
Okay. So she's back in October 18.
She's back in October, and so she's back on L&M for a little while, and then they get rid of her because she was being very, very erratic with turning up and things like that. I believe that was the issue.
Erratic with turning up, or erratic with her callers or guests? What was
erratic with point? Just they wouldn't necessarily know if she was going to do a show. Okay. Because the only way they'd know is if there was anybody on air or not, literally.
Wow.
And they sort of, I believe they dumped her without telling her one night when she was on the air. So she didn't know that she wasn't going out over their network. She was only going out over her own streams. So that wasn't brilliant for her. And then we get through. She did actually run then until January the 2nd of this year. And she's been gone with no word since then. She just stopped broadcasting. And her last post on Facebook was a completely random post on the 28th of December. But she's not done a show since the 2nd of January. So there's been no contact with any of her fans or any of her fan pages or anything.
Okay. So that's the history of her radio career. Now do we delve into a lot of the stuff I've heard recently about, like the, what did we call it? I can't even remember the name of it. The welfare check. Are we going to get into that at all, or we won't because you don't have much knowledge of that, or do we deal with that?
I do have a bit of knowledge, actually.
Okay.
We can. So it's worth also something that I did miss. Everybody's going, oh my God, I can't believe you missed this. So probably around May kind of time, Heather started to talk about the fact that Art had committed suicide.
Was there an
Okay.
autopsy? Was there what was
Yes,
done?
there was.
Okay, and what did he die from?
So he died of the official medical examiner's report says it was an accidental overdose because he has COPD and he had some back pain, so it was an accidental overdose.
Okay.
Which is very, very different from saying he committed suicide and she'd seen a note, which is what she'd been saying an awful lot.
She said she saw a note, a suicide note. Is that what she's saying? She saw
That's
a suicide.
what she's, yes.
Okay, now has that note ever been seen by anyone else except for her? Has it been seen by the police?
I would presume not if the coroner has said that it was an accidental death.
Right.
So, yeah. Now here's where my opinion comes in. And my opinion is as follows. I don't know whether Art committed suicide or not, but I would damn well make sure if the coroner's report had come out and it was an accidental death for as a way of respecting the family, there is no way I would say, oh, he committed suicide. I think it's a terrible thing for anybody to say about anybody else.
Yeah.
But she even said it to me in the phone call that I had with her because I straight out asked her why she keeps saying that Art committed suicide. His widow had spoken on an interview that I carried out with Karen Jackson and said, please stop talking about this. Please don't talk about this. It's really upsetting when my eldest daughter, who's I think 11 now, asks her mum what committing suicide means.
What a way to find out. Are some people thinking that he committed suicide but it's been covered up or not? What's with, like I said, I'm not making any judgment here at all. I have no idea what happened. I'm just asking, some people might have in their mind that, people think that the government's covering up aliens and UFOs that have landed in Area 51. Do some people think that there's a cover up and that he did commit suicide? Do some people think that? I'm curious.
I think there are some people that think that. I don't think that.
Okay.
And like I said, I think out of respect for the family, if a judgment has been made by a lawful body, then it's the right thing to do. It's case closed, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't go and say something else. So...
Question for you. Art Bell was off the air for several months before he had passed away. What was the time element there? How many months was it that he was off the air?
Oh, it was 2 years.
2 years, right. So now
yeah.
we don't know the condition of Art's for that 2 years. Do we know that? Here's the situation. I had a uncle who was 90 years old. He was quite old, a lot older than Art. And my uncle was suffering from basically his body is aged. And he wanted to go to some of the states in the country that allow suicide. So he wanted to do that. So do we know the condition of Art before he died? Do we know the condition of, was his back a mess? Was, for instance, Robin Williams committed suicide? And because a lot of his body was falling apart, and I don't know the exact circumstances of that either. Do we know Art's physical capabilities, his abilities, and his mental state at that point for that 2-year period? Do we know that?
Yeah, I think his COPD was potentially getting worse.
Uh-huh.
He had pneumonia, I think, the year before.
Okay.
So he was, but from all accounts, from what Karen said to me when I spoke to her, when I interviewed her, he was in good spirits.
He was in good spirits. Okay, I think we have a caller here. Perhaps let me pull this person on, and then don't forget where you left off, and I won't forget where you left off.
Okay.
Do we have a caller on the line?
Hey, Dave, how are you doing? This is Robert McDonald, Art Bell's former national affiliate director.
Oh, okay, great. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I wanted to call and respond. I agree with Heidi that there would be absolutely no way that Art would have committed suicide. He loved his wife. He loved his two kids. He loved what he was doing. And for Heather to make these insane accusations that he took his own life when, you know, he loved his family too much. It's just it's outrageous to hear that these accusations are still being floated around that he took his own life. I honestly I don't believe that in a million years that Art would have willfully or even accidentally take his life. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I've talked to Art several times, you know, right after he hired me as his affiliate director, and he seemed like, you know, focused on wanting to do what was right for MITV at the time, and you know, it's. I mean, even now, a year later, I'm still shocked that my teacher's gone, my boss is gone, but you know, and it offends me that Heather would make this crazy story up that Art would do this. It's just I don't know. I'm without words. You know, and she's been a little crazy. Even after she took over MITV, I mean, she did a total house cleaning and brought in loyalists that were, you know, for her. But I did speak with Karen Jackson. I don't know, maybe a couple months after Art's death, and she and I agreed that there would be no way that Art would have done himself in, and all of these stories of this happening is not only hurting Art's widow, but also the two kids, because, you know, they're without their father right now. And, you know, I just wish that these things would just die and let's move on. But unfortunately, it won't until we actually get solid answers.
Well, we did have solid answers. We had the autopsy, right? Or the coroner's office deemed it a certain way. So we do have a closure, right? But now we have an open end because someone had said something that supposedly there's a letter, but no one's seen the letter, and she has never passed on that letter to any authorities to validate the situation that she believes occurred. So we do have closure. The closure should be that Art Bell had actually died of an accidental overdose, right? Don't we do have closure?
Right.
I think we do, right? We have closure.
Well, on that aspect, yeah, we do have closure. But now this additional controversy about this alleged suicide note exists, and it's you know, causing a lot of fake news fake news to be spread that Art committed suicide, when in fact, you know, that's not the case. It was an accidental overdose. That was what was ruled by the Nye County coroner.
Right.
This was an accident. It was not intentional.
Right.
And yeah, did Art have a bad back? Yeah, sure, he did.
But you can still enjoy life with a bad back.
The fact of the matter is that it was an accident, not suicide.
Yeah, and you know the thing, basically anything at all has to be legally documented. I mean, if you own rental properties and a tenant wants to leave the rental property, and he tells you he sent you a note saying that he wants to leave the rental property, and then you say, well, I never got the note. You got to have it certified. You have to have it validated. There's got to be a trail of proof that something occurs. So now, if there is a letter, then that letter has to be presented to the proper authorities to have this vetted appropriately. If anyone wants to go to that hassle, which I don't know why anyone would want to do that, if to hurt people's. Why would you want to do it? Why would you want to hurt somebody by saying that a suicide occurred when it was what is termed an accidental death? It seems like that would be more damaging, and why would you do that anyway? Just to prove that you're correct. It's just someone saying something with no validation or proof at all. It seems that way. Don't you guys agree?
I agree.
Oh, yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and hello, Howard. I do agree, but she's repeated it a lot of times. She said it on radio stations, on terrestrial radio stations where she's been interviewed. And she's said it on Facebook in comments. She said it to me when I spoke to her. and she was asked to stop by Erin, and she hasn't. And
Is there any lawsuit going on this? Obviously, we just had the Michael Jackson documentary where people were saying stuff about Michael Jackson, and now the family wants that stopped, and there's obviously legal action taking place in that. If someone's saying something about somebody damaging the family, wouldn't there be naturally a lawsuit?
At the moment,
I don't think there's going to be legal action because Heather does not have any assets that would be attachable to even make it worthwhile. Erin's going to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars going after Heather. It's just not going to be worth it. But the best thing that we could do is just shun Heather to the point where she stops making these crazy accusations that Art Bell committed suicide. That would be the only way that we're going to get any closure, is to, essentially ignore her until she provides this magic letter that she says exists, which I haven't seen, and I'm pretty sure Heidi hasn't seen. Obviously, you haven't seen it. Erin hasn't seen it. Karen hasn't seen it. So until this letter appears, I'm sorry, but this is just hot air coming out of a buffoon.
Now, you mentioned one of the solutions to this is just to ignore her and her commentary. Is she being ignored, and that's why she's not on the air right now? Is that part of the reason why she's not on the air? Is because her fans don't like what she said, and the ignoring is the fact that she's no longer on the air and a public figure?
I think that that could be one thing. I mean, she said a lot of hurtful things about Art, and she said a lot of hurtful things that have negatively affected the family. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I know everything about what's going on with the Bell family right now, because I don't. But if my wife was in Erin's shoes right now, and somebody was saying that I committed suicide without facts backing it up, of course my family would be upset and hurt that somebody would be throwing around these false accusations without any verifiable proof.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, naturally, I would think the same way. As a member of my family with my wife, and if someone said that my wife had committed suicide instead of dying, of course she's still alive, thankfully. She probably wishes I was dead sometimes, but she's still alive. I would be the word I would use is I would be devastated. That's the word I would use.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And certainly when I talked to Karen, she's still upset with Heather, especially with Heather's behavior during the funeral, or not showing up at the funeral, and just her erratic behavior in the year since, or the month and the week after Art's passing. That's pretty much what, from my brief conversation there. It was not really brief, maybe 15, 20 minutes with Karen, but yeah, I mean, it's like I said, if I put my wife in Erin's shoes, it would be. I'm surprised Erin hasn't cold cocked Heather right now, but she's a lot more stable than my wife is, so.
and evidently they know where Heather's living. If she's still living in Art's place that she bought, is she still there? Or?
Well, that's right next door to Art's place, Dave. Just to give you some geographical info on that, it's next door.
Next door.
Yes.
Wow. How inconvenient that is, right?
That's part of what I think makes it all the more difficult for Erin and the kids, and when you take that much information and put it with everything else, you can understand why it's such a difficult position for Erin to be in.
Yeah. By the way, caller, what was your name? I'm sorry, caller.
This is Robert McDonald.
Yeah,
I think you spoke a little bit ago, a little while back.
Yeah, did you?
I was Art Bell's affiliate director. That Heather, when she took over MITV, abruptly fired and brought in a lawyer with. So anyway,
Okay.
it's really, I mean, she and I haven't been on any speaking terms. I did call her right after Art's passing, but she and I have not really spoken since she fired me. So
Yeah.
but anyway.
Well, Robert, would you like to stay on? Did you have more questions, or did you want to hang up, or
No, that's about it for me. I mean,
Okay.
and that's it for me. I just I just wanted to put my 2 cents in. Hopefully, after tonight, we can put this all to bed.
Yeah.
Just let Art rest in peace.
Yeah, I think so.
You know?
Okay. Well, let's. I think we'll agree with that. But thanks, Robert, for calling in and being part of the show. I appreciate your calling.
Thanks,
You have a
Robert.
good night.
Okay. So let's continue on, Heidi. I'm curious about this. So we got all this backstory. Now
Yep.
maybe we're going to rediscuss what happened with Heather based upon these welfare checks. What's going on?
Now,
with that?
yeah, welfare
do we,
checks.
do we jump there now, or did you have more and I pushed along?
No,
further?
let's jump into the welfare checks and see
Okay.
where we go from there. So it was an interesting night when I called in. So the backstory on that is for some reason, because I'm quite vocal about Heather and different things about her, I'd obviously annoyed her, and she asked me to ring in and speak to her about 2 weeks previous to when I did ring, which was November the 16th, November the 17th, one of those days.
Of what year?
Last year.
Last year. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So I rang in because she'd asked me to and spoke to her, and she said, well, have you got a question? So I said, why'd you keep talking about the fact that Art Bell committed suicide when he didn't? It's very upsetting to the family. And she got very upset. And I said also stuff about her music licensing things and things like that. I wasn't rude. I wasn't mean. You've got a copy of the phone call, Dave, and I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this have heard it. So did the phone call. It was 6:30 in the morning or 7:30 in the morning or something when I finished on the phone, and I thought, well, that was a bit of an adrenaline rush. I'd need to take the dogs out for a walk. Took the dogs out for a walk, and I'm actually on our local cricket pitch sorting the dogs out. But, and my messenger on my phone goes and said that the police have arrived at Heather's. Somebody's called the police and said she's suicidal.
Now, where did the police go? Allegedly, did they go to the radio station or did they go to her house?
No. They went to her house where she was broadcasting from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, she broadcasted from her home. Okay, I wasn't clear on that one. Okay.
Oh, okay. Art's guest house was his old studio. So
right.
That's so somebody called the police, and
do we know who that was?
Yes, we do know who that was. But that didn't stop Heather from saying it was me that called them and the police had told her on the air that day.
Okay, so now the police went to her house because they thought she was going to do what? Commit suicide. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, now did they knock on the door and she answered the door and let
she
her
was
in?
on the air.
She was on the air. Okay.
She was on the air.
Mm-hmm.
She heard people banging at the door. She told the person that she was speaking to on open lines to talk, and she went to answer the door.
Okay, I heard that audio, by the way. I did hear the audio that you sent me on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And then it was. I think the poor guy was a bit scared and was talking about his cat.
Yeah.
For 10 minutes.
I remember that. Right.
And then she came back. Was very upset that the police had come to the door, obviously, while she was on the air.
Yeah, sure.
I can understand that,
Yeah, I would too.
But what annoyed me was the fact that 15 minutes later, she said that the police had told them it was me that rang. So let's get this straight. The police would never tell anybody who called in a welfare check, because they just don't do that. 2, it definitely wasn't me, and I had to put a FOIA in to the Nye County Sheriff to get the documents so I could send them to Heather, which I did, and said, look, this is clearly not me. I didn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, thanks for the apology that you're going to give me on air, which I never got. And then a chap called Sean said that he'd done the call.
Okay.
So that was one welfare check.
Now, by the way, on the air did she say that it was you that made that
Yes.
call? She said that on the air. She said it was you that made that call. She said that on the air to all of our listeners to hear her say
on
that.
the air, 20 minutes after the call. You can play it if you want. It's one of the files I sent you. My full name, which also surprised me because Art would never allow people to use full names on the air, and also Heather had explained previously to someone that they couldn't use full names, and she managed to use mine twice.
Right.
Which I felt was a little bit unprofessional of her. So that was one welfare call. Obviously, we have Pedro's one.
Right, we had that last night. We had that one last night, right?
Yes. Yeah. But I did read from Dark Waters on Facebook post he made that there had been at least 8.
8 of these welfare calls.
Yes.
So the interesting thing about that, and this is sort of interesting, is if she was on the radio show talking about Art, saying that he committed suicide, and people didn't like the fact that she's saying this at all, yet they still cared about her enough to say that they wanted to do a welfare check on her because they feared for her. So in one aspect, they didn't like her, but on the other aspect, they cared enough about her. Right? Is that true?
I think you may be underestimating Heather's fans.
Okay.
And I'm sure some of them are going to call in. But I think that whatever Heather says is truth to a lot of her fans. And that's my opinion. Obviously, I don't know.
Can you repeat that?
It was perfectly acceptable for her to say that, as far as I was aware from what I've read.
Okay.
And that's my opinion. And it's also based on what I've read.
Is there any real validation that Heather was attempting to commit suicide, or there was not, and it was just fear that she's distraught at one point?
She was very distraught. I would say there was a few issues, a few meltdown is a slightly unkind way of saying it. There was just certainly, I would say that things really started to go south for Heather from that date. And she had a lot of issues with missing shows or sleeping very late and getting very upset, or not getting enough sleep and then being upset. And there was there was issues with her having very emotional periods while on the air. I do a podcast, and we used to talk about Heather a lot. Obviously, we don't so much now. We talk about different subjects. We interview different people. But there were times when we made conscious decisions that we were not going to speak about Heather, because it was obvious that she was in a lot of mental pain and she was not coping with things very well, and we weren't going to speak about her. Was she suicidal? I don't know. Was she in a lot of mental anguish? Yes. Was it connected to her fans? Partly, I think. She had boundary issues with a lot of people, I think, and that was causing her problems, where she literally said she was unable to get to sleep because people were always talking to her online.
If any callers want to call in, by the way, or I could start reading some chat things here. By the way, I see one Ed here. Ed said Not all welfare agencies tell the person who called on them. Now, when I see the word not all welfare agencies, I would almost suspect, especially today, anonymous is an important part of things like this. I mean, for instance, if I live in a homeowners association, if I call the homeowners association and call to report my neighbor, the homeowners association is going to keep my name out of it.
Yeah. And in fact, when I did the FOIA to find out information, because I did a FOIA to find out the information on the call and what was said to the dispatcher and what the dispatcher said. They explained in the cover letter to me that they were unable to give me a name, and they also don't give the name to the person who's receiving the call, because it safeguards the person that's calling in from retaliatory attacks, and that's their procedure in Nye County.
Okay, I'm reading some of the other comments here. Angie says, let's see. No, she really sounded suicidal. We all heard it. I'm assuming that means she sounded suicidal on the air. Now, I never listened to Heather. Did she sound suicidal on the air?
I think she sounded like she was in great emotional distress. I would not. I wouldn't trust myself to say yes. She sounded suicidal. I think she sounded very, very upset.
Sounded upset. Okay.
But the upset could flip in a moment from upset to angry. Yeah. And that's not necessarily what I would consider suicidal.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think they kept her on the air so long? They think that the emotional thing she was doing was good for ratings? I mean, some radio stations and personalities like that.
She was a one-man band, Dave. This was
okay.
her internet radio show.
Oh, right. She had no affiliates at that point. She had no subscribers, or she did on her own. What was that?
Yeah, she'd fired her producer at that point. She had no affiliate internet station. L&M had canned her. I think at that point she had one affiliate, which was KCAA. But that was because she was a friend of the radio station owner. And it was literally a matter of they didn't know whether she was going to turn up from night to night, so they would just have a replay ready. She was a one-man band,
right? Gotcha.
And she was in crisis.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. I'll read some other stuff here. Miller, who's the guy that called yesterday, who identified himself also as Pedro, said that she had 800 subscribers. Is she had 800 subscribers at the end as you're discussing her right now?
I heard she had 63 at the end. 63
at the end, but she might have started off with
$5.
Okay,
$5 a month.
Okay, does she still have that subscriber base going? Are people still paying for that? Even though
people are still paying, getting charged.
They're still getting charged. I kind of heard that. How could she be charging people when she's no longer on the air producing product for these people to have their...
She's not been on the air since January the 2nd, and people are still having money taken out of their PayPal account if they haven't cancelled their subscription.
Are they hopeful that she'll come back, and then that's why they're still paying her? You don't really know why they're still paying, right?
I don't know why people are still paying.
Right, okay. Let's see if I can read some more of the viewer mail. I said I'm doing viewer mail like David Letterman did. Let's see. Robert here says, Heather is unstable. And Haley says KCAA ran it till the end. So I guess this KCAA no longer on the air, or they're still on the air, but just her show went
They're
off?
Still on the air, but they no longer run Heather's show. Fred Lundgren runs KCAA and is a very stalwart supporter of Heather. And he held out for a long time before he had to replace her slot, I think.
You know, one thing I got to say, and I'll say this, to do an attempt at radio, and I've said this a couple times, to do any attempt in radio at all, podcast, Facebook Live show, you got to give people some respect for their attempts to do so. So now people were all over Heather because they didn't think she was good enough to be on the air or to replace Art Bell. You can never surpass an Art Bell. I've said that Art Bell is not a 1 in a million. He's a 1 in a planet. To have that level of talent, that level of to have talent is one thing. You got to have some degree of luck. You have to have some degree of confidence. You got to have a lot going for you to reach an Art Bell's career pinnacle that he reached. To bring someone in to take over for an Art Bell is almost an impossibility because people got so used to Art Bell to have even a different voice, let alone even if they were equal to Art Bell, just to have a different voice is going to throw people off. So anyone attempting it, so I give Heather respect in the fact that she tried this. And
I completely agree.
But I think some people were all over her. Supposedly, from me reading, some people were all over her at an early stage, saying that maybe she had no talent, she wasn't an equal to Art Bell. You can never be an equal to that guy. So you got to give people a little bit of a learning curve, and then the learning curve, if she doesn't learn, she's going to get naturally moved out of that because the fans won't like the show, they won't follow it, and it'll dissipate on its own. But I don't. Were people all over her? Were they angry at her for being part of the Art Bell legacy? Were they angry at her? Do you happen to know that?
I think people.
Were they intolerant?
I think at the start, people were willing to give her a let and see how she went.
Right.
I think I listened to her for a while because I was just curious when she initially took over from Art. Then I lost interest because she just wasn't doing it for me. And then I think she went through a period where she found it very tough, and I think that people. She's always had a very big. Quite a big core of fans, but she also had detractors. I don't think she necessarily helped herself that much because it's like Robert said, as soon as Heather got in, she blew a lot of people out of the water and stuff like that.
Do you think she should have maybe had a call screener to screen out the people that were discrediting her because maybe she?
I don't think she. No, you see, she didn't. Right, so Art Bell always did unscreened open lines.
He did, right? Correct. She followed that.
Heather always said she did unscreened open lines, but they were very heavily screened.
But yet they were heavily screened. But the callers that were
the callers that were coming in were all very positive.
They were. Okay.
It took me a hell of a long time to actually get through, even though she'd asked me to ring in, and she knew I was ringing in.
Right.
Her detractors were online, and I only took an interest, and I did criticise her, but I criticised her not by abusing her, but by pointing out the truth. And it's like I was saying all this afternoon on your Facebook page, the truth is not trolling. It is the truth. Your inability to accept it as something you like is your responsibility. Yeah. And it would. My interest and criticism only started literally after she called George Knapp a vulture when Art Bell had died, because I was like, hang on a second, what on earth is going on here? And the more I watched, the more difficult it came for me to keep my gob shut, really. And then I completely failed. Yeah. But I never abused her, and people seem to think I'm evil, but I'm not. I just point out the truth.
When I do my show and I interview guests, I had someone criticize me today because they said, Dave, you're having a discussion tonight. Do you know anything about Heather? Do you know anything about the situation? And I said, no, not at all. And he said, oh, what a wise host you are. And then, so now I know that some people have criticized Heather for not doing her homework or a study of the guest that she had. But maybe she took a different approach. There's different approaches to doing radio. I think Art studied the guest pretty thoroughly, but Art had the talent to ad lib based upon what he heard. Now, the way I do a show is I don't do a lot of research. In fact, I try to eliminate the research. I do just a glossing understanding of who the guest is because I want to learn along with the listener.
Yeah.
So I take that risk in being witty enough or spontaneous enough to listen and then ask a question that's appropriate. Maybe that's what Heidi did.
Heather.
I'm sorry. Thanks. You guys. Names are too similar.
Right.
Yeah, you can see why I'm not a professional host, right? I'm confusing names already. But could it be that she had a different approach where she wasn't fully knowledgeable about the guest she had on and she was trying to ad lib, but she wasn't as good at it as Art Bell was and people were giving her headaches for that? Or were they not giving her headaches at all? I don't know.
I think until... I think she was coasting along quite happily until Art died.
Yeah.
And then people were paying attention to what was going on. And then when she came back, people were paying even more attention. And that's when, if there were any holes in her interviewing chops, they were easily seen.
Right.
I think she was coasting along for 2 years. And people were just not, if they were going to be a detractor, they were not necessarily paying that much attention. I'd stopped listening. And so she had a core group of fans. Huh. But again, her subscriber base was going down to critical levels because she'd mentioned that herself. When Art passed, all the attention went back onto Heather.
Right.
Because of her actions, really. If she'd have got herself under control, done a nice memorial show and carried on, where would we be now? I don't know. So she's been off the air for probably about 115 days now, with no contact whatsoever with anybody, as far as people know, and no... nothing on her Facebook. Yeah? But if you go and look at the Heather Wade page on Facebook, there's still people posting, I hope you're all right, and I hope you're, and I hope everything's going okay.
I wonder if
she does have fans.
I wonder if she'd be welcome back on the air. I mean,
I think she would be.
And I've heard some people say that maybe she's depressed. One of the ways to get undepressed is do something that'll move you out of depression. And one of them could be to talk to some of the people that like you and come back on the air and recreate that energy, that fun that evidently she had in the beginning, and maybe try to start anew. I mean, who's done it? Robert Downey Jr., right? He went off the deep end, and look at him now. He's Iron Man. Well, he's invincible.
Here's my piece of opinion. I think Heather is very upset with Art that he died.
Yeah.
And until she can move past that potentially, she's a bit crippled from it.
Yeah.
And I do also, because I'm sure there's a few people in the chat saying, see, she hates her, she hates Heather, and this is why she's being so horrible to Heather. I do want to point out something. I don't hate Heather. I dislike intensely a lot of the things she's done, and certainly to me. But I was thinking about this earlier, a lot of people think I hate her. I don't. And I will give you, I just want to take a couple of minutes, Dave, just to... Sure. Throw out something that will hopefully allow people to see that I don't hate Heather. Okay? So, Miller recently went to Pahrump. And if just a quick thing for Miller, go and watch his videos of his trip to Pahrump. They're fantastic. What a lot of people don't know is there was an individual that was going to be in Pahrump that was doing a coast-to-coast drive who was who is actually quite mentally unwell. And during this breakneck drive from New York to San Diego, he was planning on stopping in Pahrump. And he was live streaming this trip and messaging people. And during some of these live streams and during some of these messages that he sent people that people were quite concerned about and sent me, was threats of violence and sexual violence that he was going to commit against Heather. And I was very, very concerned about this. So I spoke to somebody that I knew had stayed with Heather recently and was in contact with her, and gave Heather a heads up. Now, I'm not blowing my own trumpet, but I'm saying if I hated Heather, there is no way that I would have done that. So please don't think anybody out there is going, you hate her. I don't hate her, and I did everything that was in my power to make sure she actually stayed safe at that point.
Let me read a couple more things here. This person, Marty Sasan, he says, Dave, you don't know what you're talking about. Now, first of all, if I don't know what I'm talking about, I did give out the phone number here at 609-467-4000, and you're free to correct me if you think I don't know what I'm talking about. Call in and tell me what I don't know that I'm talking about, all right? Do that. I gave out my phone number. If you have any disagreement with me, call up and tell me what I'm a lunatic discussing, all right? It's a free format. Call up and talk to me. Tell me where I'm wrong, because I could be wrong. I'm never perfect here. I'm close to perfect, though. Kurt here says, I sent Heather a text, no reply. By the way, when you did, Heidi, when you did contact Heather recently about the situation and the coast-to-coast drive,
I contacted someone that I knew, had
right,
stayed with her and was in contact with her.
Did the message get to her, to Heather? Do you know?
It did.
It did get to her. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there any commentary back from the person that you relayed the message to from Heather saying thank you very much? Anything like that at all? Any response?
No. I didn't expect it. And to be honest with you, I would expect that the person that was giving the message would not have mentioned me. Right. Because it probably would have caused her more anxiety.
Okay.
And that doesn't bother me, as it was important to me that she got the information and could take any action she felt she needed to. I didn't need anything back.
Okay. I'll try to read one more. Here's Adam, and I'm going to read Adam's because he listened to the show last night. I'm not really a fan, but I hope she does what is best for her. If that is going back on the air, then good for her. If it's not, then good for her. I just hope she gets things in order, gets healthy. Okay, so that's part of Adam's response here. Mm-hmm. He does continue on. He says, my only real issue with her was the saying Art committed suicide. Okay, and a lot of people, I wanted to read that part because I was going to leave it out, but I better read that. I thought it was a bit wrong. Obviously, it could be very wrong. If there is no note, it could be very wrong, right?
Yeah.
It could be very wrong.
I spoke with Karen on an interview. And I talked to her for a good hour or so, and then Erin came on, and Erin Bell came on, and she read a prepared script that she wanted to read, and she cried all the way through it. She cried when she said things like, I went and looked after you, I did shopping for you, I cooked, and now you're doing things like this, please stop. And it's not right if I have to explain to my daughter what suicide means. And when you hear stuff like that and you're talking to someone and they're crying while they're saying it, it really affects you very deeply. And that's kind of why I pursue this, because I can see, and I was directly affected in a small way compared to how Erin's being affected. And it did affect me deeply because somebody was crying down the phone to me, you know? Can I ask you a question, Dave? I know you said you're not going to have any opinion on this.
Yeah, I'm not, I guess I let out a little opinion, but sure, ask your question. I'll give you an answer. Off the top of my head, I'll give you an honest answer. What do you got?
Well, I just wondered how you feel about what I've said.
I think what I feel about what you said is if anybody if anyone says that they've got a letter indicating that there was a suicide note, they need to come forward with that note and prove its validity before they say something that's potentially not true or libel or slanderous. I think there's got to be some level of proof. Otherwise, now if there's no benefit for someone going to sue that individual, which is what you said, then I could see why there is no pursuit of that legal recourse. So you're kind of at a stalemate there. However, if her fans have abandoned her because there's mention of a letter and no proof of it, then there's a reason for her to take the brunt of that punishment because she said something about a beloved personality, Art Bell, who is obviously beloved by a lot of people. When someone loves an individual, they associate that individual with a very stable household and a loving household. If you look at Art Bell's website, you can see pictures of him holding his wife, holding children, being a loving father, a loving character. Then to have someone kind of come in there and disrupt that is kind of a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way I feel about it. And if there is some proof of this, it'd also be unfortunate to produce that proof and still damage the family even though it's proved. It'd still be sort of hurtful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So why do it? Why do it anyway? Even if there's no proof and you're mentioning that there is proof, that's a disaster. If there is proof, then why do it anyway? If Heather did respect Art Bell, loved him, cared about him, suffered pain when he died, then why continue pain on behalf of his family by doing this? That's my point.
Yeah, there's no winner in this, is there?
There's no winner.
No,
and there's no winner even for the fans, a show that no longer exists, a radio personality who's gone. There's no winner. Mm-hmm. A lot of losers.
Yeah. Okay, well, you're off the hook now because I've asked my question, Dave.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for being on the show. Next week, we're going to talk about different things. We're going to sunset this topic. And the only reason I did it tonight is because yesterday we had kind of a point. Tonight we had another point because there's nothing wrong with doing a show and then a follow-up. To do a third one on the same thing is obviously we shouldn't do that. We did a follow-up on that show and it was appropriate. I'm thankful for Heidi for joining. I'm thankful for some of the people that posted. I couldn't read all of them because I was focused on listening to the dialogue here. But that's all I've got to say is thanks so much for joining the show. I appreciate it phenomenally. You're
Thanks
a great guest. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, so that's it for tonight. Thanks for tolerating this show. We're not going to dabble in this anymore. Next week, we're going to do something completely different. That's it for tonight. See you guys.